what we are building, because the virtual being is an interface, and in this case it is an interface that you can build once and deploy anywhere you want, more or less, because we used to run like a it's like a hotel for in the vacation resort, and this is basically something that I've been growing around all the time, so it's kind of was already there. I was never thinking about that, and eventually, during my studies, there was like an opportunity, because there was like, summer city, there is always kind of like a new opportunity every year. And then basically when I was like 19 years old, I decided to start my own food, fast food business, like a kebab.
Doing the kebabs yourself?
Yeah.
Really? Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's like, we started a business and we also were the only employees there. So it's like, there was no like well-developed Polish startup ecosystem yet. So I would say it was starting, but it was not a very common thing to do. So eventually I found during one of those hackathons a project that I was really passionate about. And I wasn't thinking about like eventually, maybe I will do it as a startup. I just wanted to continue this project into something that might become a business. We are kids and eventually we become students, right? So it's like you don't train, especially in Poland, I would say, we don't train a lot of team skills. So we don't have those, and then if you have something that you want to invent things and you weren't taught how to build teams, form teams and do something in together, then you eventually, you still want to pursue that and you just start alone, right? My nature was always becoming an inventor or entrepreneur, whatever. It's like I was very, very close to one to the other, because if you are an inventor, you need to become an entrepreneur to eventually create an invention. It's not something that you can stop and prevent from doing. It's more about like, so what we can do to maybe educate people, because I would say the education is always something which is always far behind the technology.
Hello, Recursive community. We are welcoming our next guest from Warsaw. Wrobel is the founder and CEO of Virbe AI, a startup incorporating a one-stop shop solution to extend your team with AI-powered digital employees. Chris has dedicated his career to shaping the future of digital interaction. Through Virbe AI, Chris has introduced a virtual being creation suite designed to transform conversational AI and chatbots into interactive human-like avatars. Chris is also involved in mentoring and guiding other companies in embracing and emerging technologies. Outside of his professional pursuits, Chris is an active individual with passion for sports climbing. Chris, I'm very happy that you're here. Welcome to the Recursive podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I read somewhere in an interview that you started your entrepreneurial career by accident. Tell me about this accident, because so far it seems like you have been actually doing it in a very successful way.
Yeah.
So maybe there is some fate involved in the whole process. Tell me about this.
Well, so it's definitely a long story, and I would say I wasn't ever planning on becoming an entrepreneur, but it eventually happens, So it's like, probably started from my family, because we used to run like a it's like a hotel for in the vacation resort, and this is basically something that I've been growing around all the time, so it's kind of was already there. I was never thinking about that, and eventually, during my studies, there was like an opportunity, because there was like, summer city, there is always kind of like a new opportunity every year. And then basically when I was like 19 years old, I decided to start my own food, fast food business, like a kebab.
Oh, wow.
In Władysławowo. So this was an interesting, piece of experience, I would say, being like in the second year of my studies, somewhere like that. So this is, I would say, probably this is what you mean by accident, and it's like got me to this business. This business was definitely a valuable lesson, but not a successful one, not in terms of like financial gains, right? But it's definitely gave a lot of valuable experience already toward this shift of, let's say, entrepreneurship in general.
How long did you do a kebab business?
So, it's like, a lot of my friends, they were kind of like doing this kind of jobs. I actually was helping during, in our, pension house. So I think that's the word. I'm not sure if that's the proper term for that. And it's basically, I just asked one of the friends who used to have experience, and basically this small shop most of the time is just run by single person, even if it's like a hired person, right? So it's like, so it sounds like it can be easy, right? To start it. And he actually trained both me and my brother in the art of making kebabs, and and it was really interesting. So that's how we started the business.
You were doing the kebabs yourself?
Yeah.
Really? Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's like, we started a business and we also were the only employees there. So it's like, yeah.
So I guess growing up with your family, you also saw the highs and the lows of entrepreneurship, because I think this is also a valuable lesson that one needs to have before they dare to become entrepreneurs.
That's true, but when you're young, you are not analyzing this in this way, right? So it's like a reality for you, right? So it's eventually later, when you become older, you start to kind of like, glue pieces together, and it kind of like, okay, so now I understand what my parents went through, right? When they has to, pay salaries or anything like that, right? So it's like the struggle of making a business, and usually outside people only see either the success or failure, right? But if like business is running somehow, there is a lot of struggle, which is never resurfaced in any way, right? So.
But I wonder also what motivated you to go into engineering and computer science, coming from the hospitality industry.
I would say it's also I would say this is part of a DNA, right? Or maybe like the specific part of what kind of like, topics you like in school and in general. So I was always a math and physics guy. I never wanted to do anything related to IT at the time. Part of this was like I didn't meet a right teacher, right, during this kind of like valuable period of growing up.
So what was the original aspiration? What did you want to become when you grow old?
I think I wanted to be a scientist. I remember that I really would like to invent things. It's like, it was kind of like growing about, those like encyclopedias, reading about like invention of engines and so on, right? So and also computers in a way. So I would say definitely there was something there that kind of like, but I didn't ever pursue that career. So eventually, I started like, it's like electronics studies. So I wasn't planning on becoming a software engineer. But then during those studies, I actually discovered that I'm really good at, software, and it's really interesting to be, to develop code in general. Easy, you can do it alone. It's like kind of, you can do a lot of things by yourself. So invent new things in a short amount of time. So it's like,
Why was that an advantage to do stuff by yourself? That's interesting.
I would say initially it's we are kids and eventually we become students, right? So it's like you don't train, especially in Poland, I would say we don't train a lot of team skills. So we don't have those, and then if you have something that you want to invent things and you weren't taught how to build teams, form teams and do something together, then you eventually, you still want to pursue that and you just start alone, right? And I remember what I would say, the moment when I turned proper into this kind of like way of eventually the entrepreneurship path that I'm on right now, is when I started attending hackathons. So long story short, I became a software engineer, then I started attending hackathons. And hackathons is this kind of like forced environment where coders just basically come together. Initially it was only coders, but then it kind of like started to be more versatile. So also product designers, project managers join together during like a weekend sprint on something. There's a lot of, nowadays we kind of like know this. Everyone probably heard about like hackathon, about this kind of like events, perhaps even attended one. So it's kind of like the moment when actually, if you do something together as a group, it's just faster, it's just easier, and so on. So that's actually when I started doing hackathons, then it kind of already changed my direction. It was really hard to, let's say, stick around at one job, meaning my average employment time in a single place was around like 9 months. Because eventually, in 9 months...
So bad. That's so bad for your CV. And I remember there was someone on the street who, asked me, what do you do now? And I changed my job again. Oh, you should be careful. That's not good for your CV. And I'm like, who cares?
Yeah.
Anyway.
But I would say this is more beneficial for in general. It was more beneficial, 10 years or 15 years ago. I would say it's even more beneficial now because you can actually learn, I would say 90 or 95% of the craft, let's say, of particular business in this amount of time. And then the last 5% is really, it takes a long time to learn eventually. And eventually to get to the next level, there is, a lot of like stories about hitting the ceiling, right, in the corporations, like waiting 10, 15 years for another opportunity to grow, right? So I would say from the personal perspective, I wouldn't say it's a bad thing. It's kind of like if you have like this kind of like mind that really wants to learn new things, I would say this is your way to go. I don't want to encourage anyone to do that, but it's like just try to ask yourself this question, because if you feel stuck in some place, then perhaps there is a time to change.
And did you dare also to join a startup before you found your own? Did you have this experience as well? Because I think a startup environment is also a place where you can learn so much, because everyone is responsible pretty much for everything, and you just do the work when it comes, and it's not because it's in my job description.
I would say, like, when I was starting, it's probably 2011, 12, probably, when I started attending hackathons. There was no like well-developed Polish startup ecosystem yet. So I would say it was starting, but it was not a very common thing to do. So eventually I found during one of those hackathons a project that I was really passionate about, and I wasn't thinking about like eventually, maybe I will do it as a startup. I just wanted to continue this project into something that might become a business. That was my first goal, not to eventually become a startup, but actually, I want to put this product into the market. So the startup that I started working on at the time was like a velociraptor. So we wanted to do this kind of like bracelet for fitness training. And it was we just started. We just didn't think about, okay, we should raise money before that, and we were really passionate about the technology and the product, rather than kind of like creating a really well fundaments for building a business, right? And this is what eventually started my journey into, okay, so how to actually do business, right?
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you also a bit more about the lessons, but I wanted to pick also on something else that you said before. So if you don't have the right fundament from, let's say, school, on how you can work in a team, how you can also lead a team, because as a CEO, you're also in this leadership position. What was your way to catch up with this kind of skills? I mean, I see that the hackathons, they had this like a huge impact on your mindset, and you saw, okay, actually, when we go together, we probably would go faster. No, the saying goes different way. If you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together, right?
That's true.
So, but maybe for you it was I don't know, 2 in 1.
I would say I learned the hard way. No. I learned the hard way. For me, it was definitely going fast. I wasn't thinking about going far initially, and this is something that I know probably today. And like, let's say maybe save that for later, and some tips related to that. So what would I have done differently if I were doing this again? But I would say this is kind of like closing.
Would you do it again? I think that's the more
for sure. Yeah, okay. It's like once. Yeah, I would say it's like you need to be in what's the word for that? In agreement with your nature. And I would say my nature was always becoming an inventor or entrepreneur, whatever. It's like I was very, very close to one to the other, because if you are an inventor, you need to become an entrepreneur to eventually create an invention. It's like we live in a world that kind of like doesn't create inventions without a money, social acceptance. There is a lot of complex constructs.
You need a vehicle exactly to commercialize an invention on the market. Otherwise, I mean, it could stay an invention, but it won't necessarily have impact on the world. So if you want to have impact, you need to have some kind of vehicle for that.
Okay. So I learned this the hard way. But it's like, I would say the first startup failed, and then eventually, I actually
that's after the kebab. So the kebab
after the kebab, there was a velociraptor thing. There was this bracelets. We try to pivot it, because you also start to learn new things, right? So actually, once you start doing startup, then you learn a lot of new things. You learn about lean way, how to do that, how to bootstrap, and so on. And eventually, you learn new concepts, but you don't understand what they mean, for instance. So what I would say, we definitely were kind of like, we were told initially that we are trying to boil the ocean. And that was true, because we tried to build a sport bracelet. There was a hardware startup. It requires a lot of money. You don't know this stuff, right? And some of the mentors, they said that, right? So it made a lot of sense. And, we eventually tried to pivot into climbing software. And that was a second mistake of my career, because it was kind of like bringing your business really close to your passion.
So it's not a good idea?
That's not a good idea, because you might be biased, in terms of like, is it a good business or is it your passion project? So you probably understand.
Yes, I do. Okay.
But after that, eventually, I came back to the market as not anymore as a software engineer, but as a product manager or technical product manager. Because I also discovered that I'm really good at learning new technologies, trying new APIs, frameworks, VR, AR, machine learning, and so on, and just trying to kind of like, okay, this is an interesting piece of technology, how to introduce it into the product, right? Because initially I would say I was more technology focused, then I became more product focused, and then I was still product focused more when I started this company, Virbe, but eventually now I would say I'm definitely more customer/market focused.
That's probably also a valuable lesson.
Oh yeah, it is.
That you need to, be constantly in a feedback loop with the market so that you can create a valuable product. Okay, why Virbe? Not so much about the name, but why? How did you initially come to the idea that this could be a product for the market? It's actually somehow in between I don't know. It's like a cross function of both conversational AI, but also the virtual reality, augmented reality.
Yeah, I would say once again, I was fortunate enough to actually, to all the experiences that I had in the past, VR, AR, machine learning, conversational, chatbots, and so on, this kind of like stuff, plus working with companies, helping build SaaS products in general, because I used to work for software houses, so eventually help build a VR AR department at some point, trying to kind of like, I learned what it means to build a sustainable product, how to create a product which can last longer, right? Not just a project that you launch in a weekend, but eventually something that can be used commercially by thousands or hundreds thousands, right, people. So eventually, SaaS experience plus all those, emerging technology experience, kind of like, this is like this aha moment. I remember seeing like a very simple project from AWS, Amazon Summer, and it was called. It was kind of like a virtual being product in a way, but it was so poorly made in terms of like, user experience, conversational experience, and then eventually the way this framework would have to be used to eventually, introduce it into an enterprise ecosystem, that it was this kind of like, So I can imagine that in a couple of years, this is actually really saying, I can imagine that in a couple of years, people will be needing virtual being technology to integrate it into their products, right? And ChatGPT happened. You probably know the rest of the story. You can interpolate. The ChatGPT happened 1.5 years ago. It kind of like took a year before enterprises kind of like learn the values of that.
Is it really already 1.5 years?
Yeah, almost. Like from the first ChatGPT version, more or less. True. But it's like, I would say now, just for the past 6 months, it's the moment where actually enterprises are not necessarily through ChatGPT, but through other large language models. The space is huge right now. A lot of different frameworks, models, tools to use. Now they are trying to learn those tools and eventually how to incorporate it into their processes, applications, and actually put in front of the customers. So I would say the space that we are, where our product is positioned is the layer between the customer and the business, and especially the business that's trying to automate customer interactions.
To what extent do you work with corporations on defining like the business value of it? I guess you first need to, understand the processes in the business, what is the logic, so that you can apply a conversational virtual being into whatever they're doing. Like, where is going to be the case where they would have the most value? Yeah,
so we sometimes only work directly with those customers. We used to work more, 2 years ago. Now it's more about like handing it over to our partners. So actually, we provide technology like it's a SaaS platform, but we also have partners from different countries around the world.
So you've developed also your own partner network or doing the consulting
part? So we learned a lot of things in the early days, and eventually this is the knowledge that we are sharing with the partners. So they become experts also on how to help customers introduce this kind of like interfaces. But I would say for the past 6 months, there is actually a totally new, let's say, market opportunity where let's say digital agencies like or any kind of like software agencies that used to develop software in the past, they should learn now the new way, the new tools, the new frameworks, the new large language models, and actually help the same customers that they used to, help in the past, with their products, IT products or anything like that, but with the expertise about AI. Because I would say, there is common myth that the AI solves everything. People are kind of like, oh, there is already ChatGPT, just give me this and introduce it to my business. That doesn't work this way. Anyone that actually develops software understands the whole cycle, the pipeline, all the touch points, single touch points that your customers, your employees have during one process, right? So it requires this kind of like traditional software development expertise, but also the experience and understanding with those new AI tools. And I would say the most sustainable way to introduce AI to the world is kind of like doing this step by step. So not trying to reinvent like the sales pipelines with like a new sales GPT tool or anything like that, but actually optimizing the processes, the touch points that are probably the hardest to scale, right? So, for instance, in our case, there are industries which are far behind the digital transformation anyway. And you can imagine, like, there is a lot of digitalization in e-commerce, but not necessarily in retail, right? It kind of like, it's getting there, but it's still kind of like couple months or years behind anything that is available, for instance, for digital commerce tool, right? So this is like property management, hospitality, public offices, a lot of sectors which are not only behind of, the traditional digital transformation, but they will be even more behind when the AI happens, right? But at the same time, since there is let's say a new game is being played right now, they have like a chance to really bridge the gap, right?
I see potential for leapfrogging here, but I'm also asking myself, so if we are going to do it step by step and we are going to follow the process that has already been established, then aren't we missing out on resetting the process or introducing like a new business model? Because if you remember when the Web 2.0 or even like in the internet boom, when things started developing, it also came partially with totally new business models, like the whole share economy concept. It was introduced because of the 2.0, Web 2.0 revolution. And I'm wondering what would be the new business models after this revolution that we're experiencing right now. And if we're just going to just digitalize, or what is the word, like transform, artificialize the processes or automate the processes that they're already running right now, then I don't know, if the process is wrong, then we're gonna go with it. We're not going to.
I know what you mean. So I would say definitely there is a place for like a new businesses and probably even a new economic kind of like system around like a whole AI. I think it's already being developed in a way. So I would say, there used to be companies which are like Google or AWS or Azure, which are owners of the infrastructure, right? So every software that we have today kind of like requires like a cloud infrastructure most of the times, right? So I would say this is now the moment where those large language models are being monetized, because there is someone with an access to a lot of data to train the model on, so they can become the owner of the model. I would say there is probably a really interesting area where like an expert can kind of like transfer her knowledge into the LLM model, creating a very specialized large language models and monetizing that in a way, right? So probably I can imagine.
If you can also afford the computing power that you need, because that's the other competitive edge that probably corporations will have.
That's why NVIDIA is growing like crazy, the more valuation of theirs, because they have the necessary hardware to create this new wave of experiences. But that's such a big topic in general, the AI, and I would say, given what is actually happening in Europe, like with AI Act, you wouldn't be able to do that easily. So even if there is some sort of disruption, like as you suggested, that maybe there is a new business that will be created out of it, it might happen, but not necessarily in Europe, because because of the eventually a way to be more, let's say, we are very risk averse, right, in terms of like introducing new technology, and it's a good thing because it can immensely help us grow, but at the same time it can break some things. And I would say in terms of AI, there is much more to break than we had in the past 20 years.
So you would say that you rather affirmative when it comes to the AI Act that was just introduced, because there was a lot of criticism against the European Union that they're always kind of like, stepping into the path of innovation, that, all these regulations, we're really good at innovating regulations, but actually this is not good for the ecosystem. I don't know, maybe I'm here less a technology optimist and more of a citizen, where I'm thinking, actually, I feel safer that there is also someone, that there are also regulators who are thinking about how we're going to cushion our path to this kind of new age and new economy, and everything is going to change. I don't know. What is your evaluation?
From the society perspective, I agree. From the entrepreneurship perspective, I disagree. So definitely, it will, prevent from fast growing of the company. So it's probably will be even harder to create a startup in AI in Europe, because it will be, usually when you start a startup, your first market is your local market. Yes. It's really hard to, start a business and then, already sell to a different country. If you have this situation, then most of the times it will be even more beneficial to immediately relocate your company to where your business is.
Is it how you started also with Virbe? Did you do the product market fit first in Poland, or?
Well, so that's a tricky story, because I would say it's not a very, it's a technology as a service. It's definitely it's different than building like a B2C product or even like B2B product. This is like a B2D2B.
The case in our part of the world. Actually, the majority of the companies are B2B tech. And
So it's like, building technology over the product, targeted for a very specific use case. It's a different, piece of the story. And I'd say this is something that I had troubles initially to even explaining to investors, because you need to develop a lot of technology, thinking about something that is already happening, but it wasn't that happening. The chatbot word in 2019, when I was starting, wasn't that sexy anymore, right? People were kind of like very skeptical about chatbots. Yes. They become very optimistic when ChatGPT happened. So now it's super easy to explain what we are doing and what we are providing. But when we were starting, it was really hard. So actually, the first money that I got for this business was through grant. And I started in early 2020. And as you probably remember, the COVID happened. So I would say we were forced to do business in Poland. It might have been differently if not the whole world closing down. That, maybe early on we already kind of like started doing more business in Japan, or maybe even already relocating the business to US. Because those markets, I would say they are much more understanding in terms of like the capital you need to build a company. And I would say after my journey with hardware, this kind of like startups require a lot of money, and also technological startups trying to introduce a new piece of technology to the market also requires a lot of capital before they can even monetize.
But wait a second, so wasn't pandemics actually good for you, because all of a sudden the whole e-commerce boom started, and all the businesses were kind of like preparing to communicate with their potential customers, with their potential partners online, which wasn't that happening or as actively as before that. We basically learned how to do business online really during the pandemics, right?
It would be a really good time if we were ready with a product, but we weren't. We were just starting to developing it. So it's we kind of like developed the platform for almost a year, until more or less like end of 2021, and then 2022 we already started kind of like selling the product. Building our partnership strategy, so kind of like spreading the word, because what I knew will be really important for the business is actually to not only show the technology itself, but also to show businesses and customers and developers as well a new pattern of building applications. You can imagine that we can dive into this in a bit, what actually virtual being means in terms of like customer experience.
I really want to ask you about that, so please keep it short, because I need to talk about virtual beings.
So then we started a partnership strategy, and we had a guy that actually started doing a bit of investor reach out, thanks to for me basically, but I still didn't have like enough time to focus fully on fundraising yet. And eventually, before we even started fundraising properly, the LT Capital, which show our partnership, that we partner with the hackathon, they were really interested. Initially, I thought they were only interested in the technology to learn more, but they actually were interested in investing. So we started talking.
Investors usually.
I know, but it's like, super chilled, like a reach out, like, oh, can we talk about like machine learning and AI, something like that.
Okay.
And we started talking about that, but then quickly jumped to discussing business. So they invested in us November 2022.
Okay.
So that was when we actually got our first professional VC investor. Then I also had like friends and family investment into the company. And then, eventually since 2022, we more or less already started doing business. So we had a couple interesting projects with Żabka, for instance, or Łukasiewicz. And this not only, we had like both investor money and also like a capital that we can use.
Is it a good idea to have friends and family investing into your own? Because usually they say that, don't, get money from the 3 Fs, right?
Yeah.
Friends, family.
Friends and family is important. It doesn't matter.
Okay.
The last step.
Okay. Do you think that we have like a different mindset maybe in Central and Eastern Europe when it comes to friends and family? Or I don't know. I wonder.
I would say so. Yeah, people. Well, in general, there is like a very different perspective on entrepreneurship in general. It's more about like failure. We don't encourage entrepreneurship. We talk more about like risks and anything that can go wrong if you try to do your own business. But I would say we should stick to this, that there is a huge opportunity to learn. Even if you fail, there is so much opportunity to learn. So you can just think about, okay, how much money you would have to spend on MBA or anything like that, and try to, weigh, is it like more interesting to go for MBA or maybe try your entrepreneurship? I don't say like MBA is wrong, but it just depends on where you are at in your life, right? So in my case, I just had to do entrepreneurship. I really wanted this project to succeed. So, you do everything you can, right? So fortunately, I wasn't afraid to ask the money from friends and family. So.
No, it's not about the being afraid. It's about, that you're basically risking a whole relationship because of that. I think that was mostly the learning. But I wonder if maybe there is also really, really like a different kind of mindset here in our part of the world. Maybe, I don't know, we see it also as a valuable support that we can get actually from our closest. Now, can you please give me a definition of a virtual being? And I'm saying that from the background where at some point it started, because I'm someone who is paying attention to storytelling, to words, to language. And at some point I started thinking, oh my God, when it comes to the whole artificial intelligence and automation, we use words that we would usually use for humans, like smart technologies. I mean, really, is that the smart thing? Maybe, we need to redefine what is like human smart then, if that's the smart thing, and all sorts of stuff like, and here again, we have like a term which actually comes more from, I don't know, philosophical perspective of humans, beings, nature, you have life, and at the same time we apply it for something which we wouldn't consider life, right? So tell me, what is a virtual being? What makes it a being? I mean, I understand the virtual part, but what makes it a being?
Yes, there are actually two terms which are very close. So one is a virtual being and the other one is digital human. Okay. And also I agree with you. So in that case, we usually stick with virtual beings because we don't try to position our technology as digital human technology, because human, I believe, is something more than a being itself, right? Okay. And in our case, like virtual being from the technical point of view, it's like a conversational avatar that can interact with a human in a real time, right? So you can speak to it with your voice and it speaks back. But in comparison to traditional chatbots, right, because this is more or less what you can do with chatbots, but with virtual beings, you have this visual layer, which touches the another topic of, verbal and non-verbal communication. And you can actually, with virtual beings, and it doesn't have to be a human, right, because a virtual being is this kind of like broad term. It can be like an animated cartoon or anything like that, right? It's basically the way, I would say in our case, it's about like how more natural that is for our minds to interact with virtual beings in comparison to talking to a chatbot, for instance. There is a huge, topic and another, probably an hour discussion about what that means and, what kind of like research can be done around it. But more or less, the very like utility layer of virtual being, which would mean it's an interface that you can interact with a computer in a very natural way, the way you are trained to communicate with since your birth. With every app, there is a new interface, new layout, new buttons. Every website is different. There is like a pricing in different page. So there is a lot of cognitive load that you need to overcome to interact. But essentially, you just want to get your, problem solved. You just want to buy something. So just this additional layers of interfaces most of the time is just a waste of time. So if you can introduce something which is more natural for us to use, then people eventually will go toward this direction, right? So I would say this is also something what happened with ChatGPT. People start Google searching because if they could get an answer already, like a produced, processed answer from ChatGPT, then it's much less effort than just Google searching and trying to process it yourself.
I have to say that sometimes old habits die hard. If you're once used to the Google search, for me now I'm like, even when I talk to the ChatGPT, I'm like, just giving him the keywords. I don't like, I'm not putting like a whole sentence, and as I'm still trying to overcome, the moment where I'm actually using my voice to talk to ChatGPT. I don't know, it feels weird because it's like maybe a barrier that I have between me and technology. Maybe I'm someone who is resistant, but tell me, yes.
I definitely, when we were starting the company, I already also knew that people are interacting with, Siri or Google Assistant and everything like that, right? So it just depends on the situation, what's more easy and natural to use. So for instance, I always turn off the lights using my Google Home. It's just much more effort because I already left my phone somewhere in the bedroom. I don't want to have it all around me when I'm at home. But so when I'm just going to sleep, I just say, okay, turn off all the lights. In Supernatural, it would be more effort to eventually go once again for my phone to turn off all the lights.
I'm doing that with the music. So the first thing that when I wake up is I just play the music from the.
So it's just a matter of situation. So it's just a matter of how accessible it will become. It eventually will be integrated into your phone, and I don't know, you are driving, and you will see that it actually, it really understands you and just gives you an answer to a very complex thing, right? Because sometimes you just need to solve something very complex. That's why we go to the desktop rather than phone, right? For certain tasks. But with ChatGPT or AI in general, it just turns out like most of the stuff that you would have to do on a smartphone or on desktop can be solved in seconds just with a single prompt, right?
And where do you see, I mean, what I find interesting is that you have also your background a bit more in the metaverse space. So at some point we were very hyped about metaverse, and then I think we became a bit more skeptic. Are we really going to move in there and stay there forever? It turns out that it's not going to happen that fast. And from this background, realistically, where do you see the potential for virtual beings in the space also of metaverse in the future?
So that was also one of the hypotheses perhaps now of what we are building, because the virtual being is an interface, and in this case it is an interface that you can build once and deploy anywhere you want, more or less. So you can use it on digital signage. That's, for instance, how we work with retail. We have those screens already installed, like in shopping malls and everything, so you can just install it there, right? So actually create a new way of interacting with customers. Then you can add it to mobile app, to website, and also in our case to like those immersive experiences like spatial computing, VR, AR, whatever you call it, right? Because there are so many different terms right now to describe it. So we actually think about this as additional channel. And that's also what is a benefit of Virbe. From the company perspective, if you really if you have to automate, right, your customer interaction, because you don't have enough, people that you can hire, you cannot train them fast enough with, bilingual, multilingual, skills and so on, then eventually you start automating, right? So it's just a matter of, if you start to doing that, to do it maybe more in a pleasant way, right? So it will be much pleasant for your customers. And then also something that eventually, if you do once, then you don't have to redesign new app, version 2 of the mobile app, right? It would become something which you can just update in the cloud with the new knowledge of your processes, your offer, and so on, and this immediately propagates to all the channels.
And you can transition to it actually also step by step. I mean, keeping certain stuff still in the old ways, but let the algorithm learn from it, and then,
So for us, metaverse was always another channel. And I would say from the consumer perspective, it's just whatever will be the easiest to use at the time, right? So I would say at the moment, VR, AR is not popular because we don't have like a hardware that is, let's say light enough or small enough to carry it around. But I can see a lot of, potential benefits of using this kind of like AR glasses, right? To work, in a random place, travel more and work, comfortably, right? Because you don't have to travel with your, even laptop probably most of the times. You can just connect to the cloud and have everything you need in Bali, right? So that would be interesting.
Because one of the negative aspects of automation and introducing AI to certain business processes is that we won't be able to reskill, upskill the people that fast. So people are afraid for their jobs. And I'm actually wondering in the space of conversational AI, how is the whole industry that is, I don't know, around BPO, call centers and so on. So how are they reacting to what you're offering to them? Because I can imagine that it has the potential to eliminate a lot of lower qualified positions.
But it can be substituted with something else, right? Because it's like there is a huge dilemma probably between entry level or first line jobs that no one wants to do, but they are forced to do because they don't have any other alternatives. And using something which will substitute this kind of jobs. The economy itself, most of the times it balances out in the longer time, right? Eventually, in one moment of time, you might be a huge, this balance, and then people are laid off, they can't find job. But eventually, the economy will not work if there is like a, I would say the average flow of the services, right, in the market. So that's why the new markets are being developed. To actually be a business and sell things, you need to have buyers, right? So that's why the economy eventually balances out all that stuff. But it's just a matter of how, in which way it will be introduced. This, let's say, new piece of technology. And I would say in this case, like Europe shouldn't be that afraid, because AI Act kind of like will slow down things. So that's why it will be hard doing business also in AI in here. But it will eventually, from the society perspective, probably will be smooth transition.
Well, I don't think that we should worry about unemployment in Europe. I mean, we have exactly the opposite problem. We actually don't have enough workers for all the jobs that are out there. I want to ask you about another field that I believe there is a certain intensity happening around, or there might be a conflict. When we speak of virtual beings, and I think what you also explained is that it's going to be much closer to our normal way of, I don't like the word normal, but our natural way of communicating. Now, that goes often hand in hand with empathy, with us developing certain attachments or attitudes towards the technology. I would never forget the story of this guy who was giving his Roomba, a bit of time to rest because it worked so diligently in the past days. Or and we know that empathy is not necessarily connected to really seeing the feelings in the other person. It's more like our projection of what we think that someone else is going to be feeling in this kind of situation. And this is transferable to technology itself as well. So I'm asking myself, are we also ready? Do we have the media competence, so to say, to work and to live with human-like beings, which are technology made, actually?
Yeah, that's
and
another
big
risks.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely there are risks, and it's like I always this kind of like say, technology by itself is not wrong. The only thing which is wrong is how we use the technology. So how people use technology. So it's not a matter of like the technology that is being introduced, but the businesses that will try to incorporate this technology. And you can imagine, obviously, just it's really hard to answer this question, is because it depends on a very specific business, whether their business and their practices are good or bad, right? Whether they try to manipulate people in some way, in a psychological way. It's already happening, right? Even today with ad space, with social media, we already do that, right? So obviously there is a lot of things that can be done wrong, for instance, when using virtual beings. But at the same time, there is also a lot of good that can be done with virtual beings, right? because I can imagine there is a lot of study actually to support that already. Like, you know, even PTSD treatment in the early stages might be easier to, let's say, somehow prep someone for really psychological treatment with a human, because it's just like sometimes a really long process that shouldn't just happen like once a week or once 2 weeks, because there is, you know, not enough time to meet more often, right, with your psychiatrist. But then there is a process that you can have in between that eventually will lead you to this like a human conversation. And this is what we really believe in. It's like not about substituting humans with virtual beings or anything like that, or AI in general, but it's really how to augment us with this kind of like technology. And I would say if the technology itself is democratized, so actually a lot of people have access to this, there is a less chance that it will be used, you know, with bad intentions, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking about things like NLP techniques, you know, of how do you actually speak to people. They were quite often used in sales. You know, it's the same principles. What was the book, like The Influence, right? Yeah. You can just, you know, very easily train an algorithm to actually to use them so that you can sell much more effectively. And we know that in a way it's been unethical, you know, and an ethical way to approach the market. So, and then,
but it's already there, right?
Yes.
So it's like, it's not something that you can stop and prevent from doing.
Okay.
It's more about like, okay, so what we can do to maybe educate people, because I would say the education is always something which is always far behind the technology. So I would say we shouldn't stop worrying about, for instance, using ChatGPT or anything during education, but actually think about how this kind of like tools can help and improve the process of educating, right? And also what kind of like even teachings we should be doing these days. Maybe less obvious things that we can basically easily get from, you know, something like personal AI, like ChatGPT sort of AI that we will be able to use almost every day, but more or less how to process information, how to verify them, or how to kind of, I don't know, you said about those like neuro-linguistics techniques, for instance. So there is also the opposite way, so that you can identify that someone is trying to influence you in a way, and you should be able to notice that, identify the situation, and basically see how
this is what happened with the Gen Zs and also the generations after that they had like this natural ad blockers. I mean, they were like, okay, you're trying to sell me something, then I'm not going. It's just, you know, too there is too much advertising in the whole thing, so I'm just gonna block it out. And you need to pass through these filters, and I guess the new generations, they will develop their own filters.
In a way,
but
that's the evolution.
That's why I actually really love my job, because I get to talk mostly to people who are optimistic, who are problem solvers like you, who are inventors, who want to impact the market. And it's not so much about, you know, the business success of it. It's more about, hey, how do we make a leap of faith when it comes to the future? And since we are out of time, and I really want to talk so much more about, you know, this topic with you, I'm just gonna maybe try to comprise it in one last question that I have to you. So when it comes to the virtual beings of Virbe AI, like, what is the biggest problem that we're experiencing now in when it comes to economy, or when it comes to like a societal or economic problem that we're currently experiencing, that you would like to solve with a virtual being? Maybe not now, it could be maybe in 10 years, maybe back then we will have the 17th version of Vision Pro, and it will be much easier to step into this world of virtual reality.
So actually I would want to touch on something that you said earlier on before I answer your question, which is acting fast versus like going far with a team, right? So I would say I'm definitely this kind of like try to play the long game, right? So I would say there is a lot of, especially in the startup world and, you know, new technologies, there is a huge opportunity for short game, which is not eventually very sustainable. And, you know, you can build a business, you can have a lot of success early on, but then if you don't build a strong fundamentals, then eventually your business will die, or has a really high chance of dying, right? And definitely this is something that you will not control in a way. And I'm pretty, you know, happy with the team that we created, and, you know, the core team that I actually have right now in Virbe. We really think about the long game. So I would say in terms of like challenges, it's about like I definitely, like, in terms of business, I would want to act faster and have more customers and so on. But I also believe that having this kind of like very structured, long-term approach on building partnership, educating the market, actually naming things out. So basically, a lot of time these days I spend even explaining differences to customers between ChatGPT, large language models, and whether they can use it in their business or not, trying to answer their questions and issues. So I would say the biggest challenge right now is actually educating the market. And the more the market will become educated about, AI, large language models, ChatGPT, and so on, the more eventually business there will be also for Virbe, which not only we help them with this digital transformation, but this is not very scalable because it's like case by case, right, with partners.
The good thing is that you have enough competition, so I think you would be educating the market together. I mean, you also have the big tech, for which conversational AI is, of course, also a big topic. So I think the education will happen much faster, and it's not going to be only at your cost. This is why, you have the whole competitors.
That's why, I usually do this kind of like interviews, podcasts, because
what I'm asking you about is more, when we speak of AI, people tell us, there are like environmental problems that we can solve with AI if we have like the right data.
Oh, you mean, okay, I know
like,
what you mean.
what is the societal or the economic challenge that you would like in your, bravest aspirations when it comes to dreams, when it comes to Virbe, that you would like to solve with conversational AI, with a virtual being?
So once again, it's really hard to question between like personal goals and entrepreneurial goals. So
thinking about personal
goals
is you're an inventor who is optimistic about the future.
Yeah, I would say public.
Paint me the future.
For me, education is this really important, sector which usually takes like a generation, like 20, 30 years to see the results, right? Because it's something that you try to, change and, influence the kids, and eventually you will see the results when they become, adults and, start doing their own businesses or like professional careers, basically. And I would say every time that I think about, and there is not enough money most of the time, because people are really hard with perceiving this kind of like long-term results, right? And especially prioritize revenue of all this kind of like long-term sustainable results, not necessarily in Europe, but in general, right? So this is something that I really would want to see more. So eventually using this not only like AI, but also virtual beings to maybe help with the educational process, with personal trainings. I can believe that there is a lot of room for actually educating even us, right, today, with different skills that we just didn't have enough time to learn about.
I think we're definitely entering an era where we won't stop learning. I mean, this kind of like old concept where you go to school and then you go to university and then it's finished and you just are working the whole life. It's ending. I mean, we're going much more into a phase where we won't be able to afford to stop learning new stuff, because the technology is so accelerating so fast. And so definitely.
So I would say AI is great at processing information and helping you process an information in a way. And virtual being is a nice touch to eventually help out with this in a more natural way.
Buddy.
Like a learning buddy, like your personal assistant.
Like a personal learning buddy, like oh mommy, we're just doing the homework together. That is cool. I like this idea. So
it sounds like you're kind of like more positive about the technology now.
I'm someone who is very optimistic, or I don't know, who has had like a positive attitude to learning, and this is one of the things that I'm kind of like missing right now in my life, that I don't have enough time to learn new stuff. When people ask me, what would you do if you didn't have to earn money and care about, and I'm like, well, I would just be like the eternal student. I would just, inscribe at the dinner. I would just be studying. I don't need to produce anything. I just love the learning part so much, or maybe because I miss it too much. Anyway, yes, I would be definitely keeping track on whatever you're doing in the future. It's super exciting. I'm also excited about the whole amalgam between the virtual beings and the hardware part that is coming at us, because I think this is when we would start, the whole thing would start making sense.
Definitely scary, but once again, it's about like not the technology itself, but the people that are using this technology.
And I wonder when would be the next time when virtual beings will have their own smell and perfumes. And anyway, Thank you, Chris, for being here. Thank you for joining me for this conversation, and also for the fact that later on you will be part of a panel discussion that we'll have on AI. I want to thank here also Google for Startups, who are hosting this conversation, and they gave us their creative studio so that we can record this podcast for the first time in Warsaw. And yeah,
thank you for having me.
Looking forward to our next conversation.
For sure. Thank you.
And if you're just as passionate about innovation as we are, hit subscribe for the Recursive podcast on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. We're everywhere.